Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I can see that many of you are coming into our Zoom webinar at this time. As our participant numbers go up, I just want to remind everybody that tonight, this presentation is being brought to you by the Historical Society of Santa Rosa. And we're doing it tonight free as a Zoom webinar and also simultaneously streaming live on Facebook. My name is Leslie Graves, and I'm your Zoom host and MC. And as I see that we have quite a few participants in our Zoom right now, I believe we'll get going. So thank you so much for joining us tonight for the Historical Society of Santa Rosa's Zoom webinar, in which we have our presenter, which is the Historical Society of Santa Rosa's board member, Denise Hill. And she will be presenting What's in a Name? The people behind Santa Rosa street names. Before she gets started, I want to go over a bit of logistics. For those of you that are new to these presentations, the presentation will be about an hour long, and we will reserve approximately 30 minutes for questions and answers afterwards. You are on a webinar, so those that are participating tonight on Zoom, we will not see you or hear you, but if you would like to type in a question into the chat area, you may do so throughout the evening, although we will not be taking those questions and presenting them to our presenter, in which I will be facilitating that after the presentation until about 7 o'clock. So we'll allow the presentation to be fully presented before we go into the questions and answers. So you may want to hold on to them because some of your questions may be answered during the presentation itself. And I'll remind those Zoom participants that we also are streaming live on Facebook, and on Facebook, their questions can be entered into comments, and then our Facebook administrator will be giving them to us on the Zoom chat. So I'll be facilitating that roughly around 7 o'clock. I hope you all enjoy tonight's presentation. We've got a great one for you. And at this time, I'll have Denise take it away.
Hi, everybody. My name is Denise Hill, and I am a board member on the Historical Society for Santa Rosa. I have had a longtime passion for history in our city, and that started, well, I've lived here since 1962, but besides that, I also live in the St. Rose Preservation District, which is in downtown Santa Rosa, and I've lived there for 30 years. So I started with researching that neighborhood and the history of that neighborhood, and eventually realized how much I enjoyed doing the research. And so here I am about 8 years later on the Historical Society's board and doing this webinar. This is a webinar that has a lot of interest, and I understand why, because I'm sure a lot of people have been driving the streets of Santa Rosa and either never thought, what is the reason that street is named that, or thought, how come I've never heard of somebody with this name? And so tonight, hopefully, we'll answer some of those questions. I do have to give a shout out to my fellow board member, Karen Stone, who helped with the research on this presentation. And I think we're ready to roll. To start with, the Historical Society wants to recognize that our city is located on the lands of local Native American tribes. So let's start with just the very common, the very basic naming conventions that cities used when they first were founded. And for this, you would want to go to 1854 for Santa Rosa. That was when we were founded, not when we were considered a confirmed, recognized city, but incorporated city, but when we were founded. And at that point, the way they set up the streets and the naming convention was that if a street ran north to south, they were named with alphabet letters. A, B, C, D, E, and F. And if it went east-west, you got first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and at the time, only 6th Street. We didn't have the other 7th, 8th, and 9th, and 10th. I believe 11th through 13th actually in this city at the time of it getting founded. This was a very common street naming practice and actually goes all the way back to 1811 in the city of Manhattan in New York, when they started with this practice known as the grid system. So here's a little trivia question for everyone, and you can put the answer in the chat. Those of you who can double task and do Google will probably be able to figure it out really fast, but at the end of this seminar, I'll go ahead and let you know what the answer is. And the question is, what is the study of road names called? So I'll let you guys noodle about that and we'll move on. So the other common naming practice for road names, street names in the early cities of the United States was to name them after the US presidents. And we happen to have the roads named after the first 6 US presidents. And those roads exist in West End, that's a neighborhood on the west side of Highway 101, and St. Rose, which is on the east side of Highway 101. The two cities or the two neighborhoods used to be conjoined, and then the freeway went through. So what was one large, mostly Italian community became 2. And so within those 2 communities or neighborhoods, we've got Washington Street, Lincoln Street, Jefferson, Adams, Madison, and Polk. And the last common practice for naming roads was, of course, where are they going to take you? What's the destination? So we all know we have Bennett Valley Road, Calistoga Road, Guerneville Road, Petaluma Hill Road, Sebastopol Road, Sonoma Avenue. I bet you guys could come up with some more. The destination roads rarely change names, but we do have one that used to be named Green Valley because it went to West County, which had an area called Green Valley at the time. And eventually that name was changed, and it is now 9th West 9th Street. And then there were some other changes that came along. And the reason for that is that sometimes roads were rerouted. Sometimes buildings were built where the road was, and they needed the road in order to use the property efficiently. And there was also a request by the postmaster at one point for the city of Santa Rosa that he really wanted to reduce the confusion for the mail carriers. They, for instance, had to deliver to Vallejo Road and Vallejo Street. And if you've looked at old postcards or old letters that have been mailed at the envelopes, there wasn't a zip code. There was, if you were lucky, there was a street address on some of them. Others just said the city name and the person's name. And you can understand the confusion of his mail carriers trying to get these to the right household. So some of the streets that have had names changed and their original names are listed here. We've got Johnson Street, which merged into 7th Street, and the aforementioned Green Valley Road, now 9th Street. Vallejo Avenue got taken away and is now Finley Avenue. Franklin Avenue used to be called Cemetery Lane. And why is that? Because it's next to the Santa Rosa Rural Cemetery. So it makes perfect sense. But eventually it was also very near the town of Franklin, which preceded Santa Rosa. And so it got renamed to Franklin Avenue. We've got Healdsburg Avenue, which used to be called Joe Davis Street. And we're not covering who Joe Davis is, but we will have undoubtedly a part 2 of this webinar at some point where we'll find out who Joe Davis is. And then I mentioned when we were talking about the lettered streets, we've got C Street, right? And C Street and F Street. And they are no longer around. If you've driven around Santa Rosa, you probably never thought about it, but where is C Street? Where is F Street? Well, C Street became Mendocino Avenue. And F Street was removed for the Santa Rosa Middle School expansion at some point. We also now have Mission, I believe it's Boulevard actually, and it used to be called Reservoir Road because it was out near the reservoir. We have Ridgeway, which we'll cover in a little while here, and Ripley Street used to be Summer Avenue, and Talbot Avenue used to be University Street. And that is connected to, this was the Pfeiffer subdivision or addition. And he had been very enamored with Stanford when he went to Stanford. So he named 4 streets for his memories of going to Stanford University. And they were Leland Street, Stanford Street, Junior Street, and University Street. So for the purpose of grouping these streets so that you have an idea of where they are easily in the city, I've got 4 groups, and what I did was I took the freeway, so 101 north-south and Highway 12 east-west. So we're going to talk about northeast first, so that's going to be north of Highway 12, east of 101. And I wanted to make Carrillo Street the first street we talked about because Julio Coro really was a big part of creating Santa Rosa. Of course, his mother, Donna Maria Carrillo, and his family lived in the Carrillo adobe, which is still trying to hang on out on Montgomery. And he was inherited 2,500 acres of land along Santa Rosa Creek. So he had this land, and he also had a livery stable on 3rd Street, and he bought and sold trotter horses, and trotting horses were very popular in the 1800s, much more than race horses. Julio was known for his generosity, and he originally sold the 70 acres to a gentleman named Alonzo Meacham in 1852. That was what would be the core of downtown Santa Rosa, or where Courthouse Square is today. Alonzo Meacham turned around and sold the same acreage to Barney Hohen, and you'll all recognize that name, Hohen Avenue, and Theodore Hammond. So we have a Hammond Street, and then W.P. Hartman, who I don't think we have a Hartman Street. Maybe I'll find out we do with the audience, but that's one that needs to be researched a little more to find out why he didn't get a street named after him. So Julio, they joined with Julio in creating the subdivision and offering lots around what was then the plaza. And you can see the photo here. That is the plaza. That's what the plaza looked like. So much different than the original photos you'll see of the first couple of courthouses. So it was definitely a plaza. It didn't have a courthouse in the dead center of it, like we did later on. And so Julio actually deeded his part of his half of the plaza to the people of Sonoma County forever. And that was through Hohen and Company. And then on top of that, with his generosity, he also gave the land for the first courthouse, the Masonic Lodge, the Christian College, and the first St. Rose Church. So that he was just an extremely generous person. And unfortunately, he was also a heavy gambler. So towards the end of his life, he was nearly penniless, and the city gave him work as a janitor at the courthouse just so he would have some income coming in. But that didn't diminish how people thought about him in the community. He was so well liked that when he died, his funeral cortege was the largest procession ever seen in Santa Rosa at the time. And the businesses for the day shut down so that people could attend the procession. So he was definitely honored on his journey to the grave. Here we go. All right, so let's go to Beaver Street, down around the JC neighborhood. And during the gold rush, Henry Beaver came out west with his brother-in-laws. And at some point, they, of course, came out for the gold rush. Apparently, it didn't work out for Henry anyway, because Henry went back and he went back to Missouri. But in 1853, again with his brother-in-laws, he was probably an organizer with them to join the 1853 Hoggins Cockrell wagon train, which is a well-known wagon train, to come to Santa Rosa Valley in the new town of Franklin. And this was no small undertaking. Probably you're going to see a fair amount of people in the early days of Santa Rosa that came from Missouri, because the Oregon Trail started in Independence, Missouri. But eventually it splits off so that you can go, it becomes the California Trail if you're headed to California and not to Portland, Oregon. And it usually took anywhere from 4 to 6 months to make this journey. And of course, you would have days when there was no water available. So you were hauling whatever water you were hauling in whatever container. There was one excerpt I read that basically said the same container that was used for drinking water was also used for washing the pots and pans and for taking baths. So you had to have a pretty sturdy stomach to survive the ordeal of coming across in a wagon, usually driven by oxen. And here's a group of men who had that, energy, that interest in seeing what the unknown might bring, and willing to step out of their comfort zone and come see Santa Rosa. So by the time that Henry makes it out here, James Cockrell, one of his brother-in-laws, has died. And Henry ends up purchasing his property from his widow, and he starts a blacksmith shop. But he's also a multitasker. So he's also a well digger and he's also a brickmaker. And he proceeds to build the first house in the area from bricks. And it was on this former Cockrell property. And so this was known as the Beaver House. And even though he lost the property to the mortgage company, the Beaver name stayed. And eventually the family moved to the Salinas area. But the house he built, which was on Beaver Street, became Beaver Street, was connected to him. And the last resident, Gene Miller, was living in it when it was knocked off its foundation by the earthquake in 1969. And subsequently, and this will sound familiar to a lot of you who've been in Santa Rosa for a while, it was raised as in torn down, rather than repaired, in keeping with the urban planning philosophy of the times. But here we have a picture of it. Thank goodness there's a picture, as recently 4 years before it got torn down. That it would have been amazing if it hadn't been torn down, because you would have had the first brick house in Santa Rosa still here for people to see, but unfortunately it no longer exists. Okay, now we have James Nash Bennett, and he was also an early settler, arriving in Sonoma County from Ohio in the 1850s, and he got his land from General Vallejo, who sold him several hundred acres. And of course, it was named eventually Bennett Valley. And this isn't, the photo I have here is not all the way back to the 1850s, but it is a sort of amazing photo image of Bennett Valley without any structures on it, except the fencing. So at the time, the city of Sonoma, and we're talking 1850s, was the only established town in the county, and was considered the logical choice for the county seat when California became a state in 1850. But the thought of moving the location of the county seat was an intriguing idea for Bennett. And so he wanted to he and his fellow neighbors that were had claims in the valley, which was the old Carrillo Rancho, were very interested in possibly moving the county seat to Santa Rosa, just newly founded. So Bennett becomes nominated by fellow settlers in the Santa Rosa area to run for state assembly. And his opponent, Colonel Joe Hooker, is from the city of Sonoma. And Joe Hooker was considered unbeatable, but Bennett beat him, which shocked a lot of people. So the question of the location of the county seat had not even been an election issue, but as soon as Bennett gets into Sacramento in office, he submits a bill requiring that the county seat in California be centrally located and that elections be called in counties where they are not centrally located. And the bill passed. So we can thank James Bennett for that particular guideline or legislation. And eventually he left after doing that. He left Santa Rosa and Sonoma County and moved to Napa County, and he and his wife are buried in the St. Helena Cemetery. All righty, Carr Avenue. So Carr Avenue is named after Edward Nelson Carr, who happened to be a descendant of Ethan Allen. And again, another early pioneer. This is getting to be a trend, arriving in Sonoma County from New York State in 1854. Now, you had some choices if you were in New York State on how you wanted to get here. It wasn't necessarily a wagon train, and families tended to go on wagon trains because it was easier and less challenging, if you can call it that, than going through the Panama route, which went where the Panama Canal is now, but also exposed you to yellow fever and malaria, or down around Cape Horn, which was inherently risky with the boats of the time and the weather that you might experience out on the open sea. And it also took quite a while to get around Cape Horn. So we're not sure how he came out here, but it's entirely possible that he came out here one of the other ways besides a wagon train, since it appears he was a single man at the time. So then he moved to Bennett Valley eventually, and his family at the time was growing grapes, some of the oldest vineyards in Bennett Valley, and at one time had over 400 chickens. And then he was a founding member of the first and the master of the first Grange in California, in the United States. I changed that. It was in the United States. Bennett Valley Grange, which is still there, is actually the first Grange hall created in the United States. Anyway, while he was a farmer, even though he lived what at the time would have been a considerable distance from town, he was actively involved in the community. He was on the Grand Army of the Republic Committee and put on processions to honor soldiers on Memorial Day. He was also involved with trying to get the railroad route going east from Santa Rosa, which was a very popular idea to try to move produce and stock around. So he was involved with that, and McDonald and Trobridge, two other names that you'll probably recognize if you've been in Santa Rosa a while, were a part of that committee also. And then his real claim to fame was that he donated when a library started being discussed for the area, and it was a Carnegie library that was being offered. He donated $1,000, which is the equivalent of $36,000 today, towards the purchase of the land in Santa Rosa for the new Carnegie Public Library, and really kickstarted the funding for that library. So he gets a lot of credit for that in the research that we came across. He died at the age of 82. Unfortunately, his wife and all three of his children preceded him in death, and he is buried in the Santa Rosa Rural Cemetery. And this, by the way, is a picture of the library, the Carnegie Library that we used to have. Okay, Grace Drive. I think quite a few people are probably familiar with the Grace brothers and the Grace Brewery, but if you aren't, the parents of the Grace brothers immigrated from Ireland to the United States in the 1840s, and then about 30 years later came to Santa Rosa. Two of the sons had a grocery store on 4th Street, but eventually they purchased the Metzger Brewery on 2nd and Wilson Street, which came with 10 employees. And they called it, of course, the Grace Brothers Brewery. There were 5 brothers and they were all involved in it. But only a few months after they bought it, it actually burned down. So they rebuilt it within the same year as a 4-story brick building, which survived the 1906 earthquake, which is pretty amazing because a lot of brick buildings in Santa Rosa did not survive the 1906 earthquake. But theirs did, and they went on to brew 50 barrels of beer a day, and they also brewed beers like lagers, and they did this for approximately 70 years, closing up in 1966. And besides the beer brewing, Frank Grace, one of the brothers, was the sheriff for 8 years in town. And they also contributed towards the fairgrounds and the racetrack getting improved. And the Grace Pavilion, and now you know why it's called the Grace Pavilion at the fairgrounds, was named in their honor. And they're all, well, Frank and his father Thomas are buried in the Santa Rosa Rural Cemetery. So Grace Drive and Grace Track are named for this family. Okay, here's a different one. So Hermit Way. So Giuseppe Forturini, who Americanized his name when he came to the United States to Joe, arrived in Santa Rosa in the 1930s. So now we're quite a bit later than the other gentleman we've talked about. And he was born in Venice, Italy. And why would you leave Venice, Italy? But he did, and he came here. So maybe we're both incredible places to visit with the wine country we have now. But he came here in 1872, was when he was born, and came to the United States in 1895, and ended up working for a while on the East Coast. And one of the jobs he had was working in the coal mines in Pennsylvania. And somehow he finds himself out here in 1920. And he was known as Joe the Hermit because he lived in an old shack made out of rusty car parts and corrugated metal. And his only job he had that we're aware of based on newspaper reports was a gardener during the summers. Now, he lived on the land of Hugh Cotting, and as most people know, Hugh was one of the biggest developers in Santa Rosa. But Hugh refused to evict him, even though he was interested in developing the land that Joe occupied. So he got to stay on his land. Hugh didn't develop it until Joe died in 1957. And his funeral was at St. Eugene's Cathedral, which was very close to where his carports and corrugated metal shack was. Now, his obituary stated that he had no family. So this was in 1957. But when the Historical Society printed an article about him in our newsletter, lo and behold, somebody popped up and said that he was a great niece, and he sure did have family and siblings. And so here is a picture, a great picture that we got sent that shows Joe on the right in the photo with his brother Pietro. And Hermit Way, for those that don't know, is on the north edge of Montgomery Village. All right, Ridgeway Street. So Ridgeway Street is named after the Ridgeway family, and Jeremiah Ridgeway came out here when he was 50, so quite a bit older than the typical person who came out and made the trek in the 1850s. He did join a wagon train from Indiana and came to Santa Rosa and prospered. quite well and became one of the wealthiest men in town. He actually owned property on 3 sides of Courthouse Square, which would have been your business district, the only business district, and would have been worth quite a lot. And his property was called the Ridgeway Block, and it was east side of 3rd Street and between the Courthouse Square and B Street. His daughter Judith also came out with him, and at the time she was married to Simeon Seymour Todd, who was a recent graduate of a medical school. And when they reached Santa Rosa, Dr. Todd formed a partnership with his college classmate, Dr. Boyce, who was one of the first doctor in the area. And they had 2 children, but the marriage fell apart over allegations of domestic abuse. So none of us at this point like Dr. Todd, right? But they luckily got a divorce, which also was probably pretty rare back then. And his wife, Judith, went on to raise the boys, while the empire of her father continued to grow. And when he died, he gave Judith this property you see here in the middle image, which was at the time the southernmost half of 160 acres of the largest untouched parcel of land on Santa Rosa's northern border, which of course isn't the northern border today, but still that's pretty impressive. And she built a grand house, and they lived in that house with her sons, and the grand house was on the corner of Berry Lane, which you have not heard of. Berry Lane no longer exists, and we'll see why. So Healdsburg Avenue and Berry Lane, and she dies, leaving the house to her son. And at some point, in 1921, a fire destroyed the local high school. And so the city was desperate to find property where they could build another high school. So they cut a deal with her son, Rush, to acquire all but 7 acres of the land around the Ridgeway house. And after the new high school was completed, that's when Berry Lane got renamed to Ridgeway Avenue. And Judith is buried in the Santa Rosa Rural Cemetery. But you can see this incredible property they had and the incredible house they had, which is no longer with us. All right, Montgomery Drive. How many of you have driven Montgomery Drive and never given a thought as to why it's named Montgomery Drive? The Montgomery Drive is named for William Billy Montgomery, and unfortunately, he was the first Santa Rosa serviceman killed in World War II at the young age of 20. He was born in Ukiah and the only child of Joseph and Anna Montgomery. And when Joseph died, when Billy was 6 and Anna remarried, the family moved to Lincoln Street, which is in the St. Rose Preservation District in Santa Rosa. And her new husband worked at the Press Democrat. Billy was described as tall, good-looking boy with blonde hair, blue eyes, and already smiling. You can see in this picture that that's absolutely accurate. And his mother said he was just an average boy who loved life. Billy attended Santa Rosa High School. He played in the school orchestra. He delivered Press Democrat newspapers, and he was a member of 4-H. And while in high school, he had joined the National Guard, and he loved the marching and the military discipline. So days after graduating in 1939, he enlisted in the Navy. And he was a gunner's mate stationed on the battleship USS California when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. And so he didn't, in 1939, he got recognized for that, obviously, in the newspaper. There were lots of articles, but it wasn't until 1985 that Billy's mother and Sonoma County veterans together dedicated a showcase of memorial artifacts of Billy's life at the Sonoma County Veterans Building. And the items include his Purple Heart medal and a letter from President Franklin Roosevelt notifying Anna of her son's death. So in 1943, so 4 years after his death, we had the street named in Billy's honor, and that's of course Montgomery Drive, which used to be an old railroad line linking the eastern city with Farmers Lane. And later in the 1950s, we got Montgomery Village and Montgomery High School, which are all named in honor of his service. All right, Spencer Avenue. So Byron Spencer was born in New York and arrived in Sonoma County at the age of 31. And again, good probability he came on a ship. He was a grocer by profession, and after opening up his stores downtown, he also expanded to selling fire insurance and became very involved in the community. He was part of a group that developed the agricultural park, which at the time was an area that was set aside for agricultural activities, and the accompanying fair, which was the precursor to the Sonoma County Fair. And that was in 1884. And that same year, he was the head of a group of local businessmen who successfully built Santa Rosa's first and only opera house. And I don't know how many people know that Santa Rosa even had an opera house, but this was a significant one. It was 80 feet wide and 200 feet deep, and filled the entire western side of D Street from 4th to 5th Streets, and was promoted as the largest auditorium in the state outside of San Francisco. Quite a feat, considering there were only 5,000 residents in Santa Rosa at the time. And it's called the Athenaeum, and I had to actually look that up. Not a name I was familiar with, but it's actually what you usually call a library or literary or scientific association, but they called the opera houses. Byron was also very compassionate and was at one time the president of the State Humane Society, and at the time of his death was the secretary of the Santa Rosa SPCA. Now, we don't have an SPCA, that's a national organization, anymore. We have a Humane Society, and of course, several wonderful local shelters that cover the area of Santa Rosa and other cities. But at the time of his death, it was that he was involved with what was called the Santa Rosa SPCA. Nice to know that at that time, 1923, Santa Rosans were already taking care of their animals. And he was also a member of the Knights of Templar and Scottish Rite Masons, which were two of the fraternal organizations that were very popular back then. See, he lived in a house he built on McDonald Avenue, and he is buried in the Santa Rosa Rural Cemetery. And you can see him on the top picture. There's a light little green circle around his face, and this is one of the fraternal organizations that he was involved in. He's standing in the back row there. Okay, for all you that were waiting, finally we're at Southeast, Southeast Santa Rosa. So let's take a look at what we've got in Southeast Santa Rosa for names after significant people. So we'll start with Colgan Avenue. So Edward Power Colgan, isn't that a great name? Was born in New York, came to California during the gold rush years, and ended up in Santa Rosa in 1853 and opened what was called a public house at the town of Franklin, which was at the time 1.5 miles from the current downtown Santa Rosa area. But at some point, right after that, the town of Franklin came to Santa Rosa. They literally put a lot of the buildings on sleds and dragged them over. And so now he's in Santa Rosa, and he decided he was going to start a hotel business, which is sort of the same as a public house. And so he started with a tent on what was then the lot that the Masonic Lodge was ultimately built on, and then eventually built the Santa Rosa house. And you can see a picture of it here, pretty amazing picture that we have this of the Santa Rosa house hotel, and the carriages out front and the people coming out to meet the carriage, probably, because that was a big deal when a carriage came into town. And so it became a stagecoach stop and the hub of the town. And it was it also provided the news, although 24 hours old, from San Francisco. It was offered food and drink, and it was $2 a night to stay there, plus $2 for each of your horses. Although it was never praised for its cleanliness, so you spent $2 a night for a room that was described as disgustingly dirty, with old clothes, indescribable towels, and combs being scattered in the corners. Doesn't that sound wonderful? Edward dies at the age of 49 while he's on a steamer en route from San Diego to San Francisco. 13 years later, one of his sons, Edward Power Jr., was elected sheriff and later served 2 terms as state controller. He is buried in the Santa Rosa, Edward Sr. is buried in the Santa Rosa Rural Cemetery, along with his wife and 3 of his 5 children. Okay, here's an interesting one. I wonder how many people know where Maida Way is. So Caesar Maida, who was born in San Francisco and lived most of his life in San Francisco, he and his wife also had a home in Santa Rosa on what was then called Kanana Avenue, which shouldn't be confused with Kiwanis Springs Road, but it's in the same area. And he bought the property south of the fairgrounds in the late 1940s. And he acquired Santa Rosa Winery on Kanana Avenue. And the winery had been established at that location in 1930 and was known for its grand prize champagne and wines. That was the name. That was I guess a very optimistic name to name your winery wines, but that's what it was called, Grand Prize. And he didn't have it for that long, maybe a little over 10 years, or close, somewhere between 10 and 15 years. But he sold the winery to Martini and Prati, and when they acquired it, they closed it and moved the facility north. Caesar died in 1970. He is actually, because he lived in San Francisco, he's buried in the Italian cemetery in San Francisco. But you can see here kind of the location on the map. It's, you can see the Sonoma County Fairgrounds, and Maida Way is out in that area between the fairgrounds and Kiwanis Springs Road. All right, now we're going to go to Northwest. So we're talking about the West End area and further west than that. So we'll start with Dr. Boyce, who we've talked about earlier. So Dr. Boyce was born in New York, graduated from medical school in Indiana, and came out with his parents to try his luck as a gold miner. And by 1851, apparently gold mining didn't work out, but he figured out that if he sold deer meat to all the people coming into San Francisco to try their luck at gold mining, that he could make a lot of money. So he's camping in the Marquette Springs area, hunting deer for the San Francisco market, and not necessarily using his medical degree. Eventually, he does take up the profession of being a doctor in general practice, and he starts it when we still have Franklintown. He was the first physician and also assisted eventually as witness on Sonoma County Coroner's Inquest, along with serving at one time as president of the Sonoma County Medical Society. And at that time, if you were a physician, much of your practice centered around accidents and diseases such as smallpox, typhoid, and diphtheria, which constantly threatened epidemic proportions in the city. And the accidents, if you read about them, are mostly horse and buggy accidents, and they're pretty extreme. So there was a lot of that, and also farming accidents that were happening. So we have our car accidents now, and they had their horse and buggy accidents. Dr. Boyce was quirky, to say the least, and he was known as a heavy drinker and was said to be a better doctor drunk than others were sober. And as he grew older, he got even quirkier, and he would go every morning to the butcher shop near his office for a piece of raw meat, which he ate so that the whiskey had something to work on. He was also an eccentric to the point of profanity, which often drove his patients to recover quickly. He builds a large Italian Victorian house on 3rd Street and lives there into his 70s. And at the time he dies, he was Santa Rosa's oldest continuous inhabitant, and also the oldest practicing physician in 5 adjoining counties. And after his death, his hospital is used as his house is used as a hospital for a while. But later, his friend Augusta Metzger, who lives in the St. Rose area on B Street, wants to save it from demolition, because as the downtown commercial core expanded over the decades, they were basically demolishing a lot of the houses, although they moved quite a few too. So she relocates his house on B Street in the early 1900s. And if you've gone into that neighborhood, you will see it next to the stone church, the St. Rose Stone Church on B Street near Brew, the current little cafe that's there. This is a much older picture of it, but you can see it was a pretty impressive building. And Boyce Street exists off North Dutton Street, and is named, of course, for Dr. Boyce. And then also in the West End area, we have DeTurk Street, but not in the West End area, we have Anteo Way. And Isaac DeTurk came out here from Indiana. He's the son of German immigrants, and his father loved wine and experimented making wine from European varietals of grapes in Indiana, but failed. So Isaac comes out here. He never marries, but he does move to the current wine country and starts the Belmont Vineyard in Bennett Valley. So here's another person living in Bennett Valley. And it grew to be one of the largest vineyards in the state until, unfortunately, it was wiped out by an infestation of phylloxera, which is this is a lovely description, a sap-sucking insect similar to aphids, and still exists today and is still a threat today to grapevines. But this was back in 1890. So then he has a passion for horse racing and has a star trotter named Anteo. And Anteo won $1,000 in 1885 and set a track record and was sold to a Santa Rosa syndicate for $20,000. Now you can imagine what that would be today, and shows you how many wealthy people in the 1880s were around the Santa Rosa area. He was ranked as Anteo was ranked as one of the greatest trotting stallions in the United States and sired over 200 offspring. And in the process of raising the trotting horses, he built a round barn, which is still here with us. It's one of the few. We lost our other round barn in 2017. This round barn is on 8th and Donahue and was refurbished by the city of Santa Rosa with a state grant a number of years ago, and as an event center. And it's a really beautiful structure, and thrilled that it's been saved. And if you haven't had a chance to go take a look at it. And so his DeTurk Street is located by the fairgrounds, and Anteo Way is located near Hermit Avenue. Okay, Southwest Santa Rosa, our last quadrant. So this is a fun story. So Baram Avenue. There were a lot of female attorneys over the years that are claimed to be the first, but really the first for Santa Rosa was Luda Fulkerson Baram. And Luda was born in Santa Rosa in 1872. And the Fulkerson family were, at the time, renowned early residents of the Sonoma County. At the age of 23, she joined the Bar Association and was sworn in as the first female attorney in Sonoma County. And she became an attorney before women had voting and most common other rights. So pretty impressive. Her husband, Edwin, who's the lower photo there by the map, he is also an attorney, and her father-in-law, John, has a law office, and he also is an attorney. Prior to becoming an attorney, the father or her father-in-law ran a little school in Bennett Valley. Not sure which one that is, but apparently one of them out there. But he was admitted to law practice in 1865 and was elected later as a member of Congress and served 3 terms. And then in 1900, Luda and Edwin were sworn in together before the U.S. Supreme Court upon recommendation by who else but their father/father-in-law. And it was reportedly the first time a husband and wife had been admitted at the same time to the Supreme Court. Pretty amazing. And all 3 are buried in the Santa Rosa Rural Cemetery. Here's another woman. We've had a lot of men, but here's another woman, Margaretta Corby. So Margaretta is born in Limerick, Ireland, and immigrated with her family to Pennsylvania in 1820. And about 30 years later, she and 2 brothers relocate to Missouri. But at some point, another 20 years later, Margaretta is living in San Francisco, and she's listed as a boarder in the city directory. Now, she's never married. She has no children. And it's interesting is why would this older single childless woman come to California? Because nobody else from her family appears to have come out with her. And she buys land in Santa Rosa, even though she's living in San Francisco. So it's even more interesting what is going on here. Well, for starters, her brother John became one of the first Missouri Railroad barons. And he died in 1870. So there's a convenient time that's near, when she came out to San Francisco. And he had quite a bit of money, and she was able to get some of that money, obviously. As a matter of fact, she gets that money. Some other people in the family get that money, and she starts investing it here in Santa Rosa. And the only connection we can find with it for her with Santa Rosa, why Santa Rosa, was that she knew the Overton family, who had the Overton Hotel in Santa Rosa at one time. And so when she dies, she actually leaves the 3 of the Overton, AP Overton, 3 of his children are in her will. We haven't found that connection yet. If anybody knows, we'd love to hear about it. But Overton also had lived in Missouri, so maybe there's a connection back to Missouri. That they knew each other, and then he came out here and convinced her she wanted to come out and invest here. So her investments in Santa Rosa put her in the same league as some of the wealthiest Santa Rosans, most of the men, with a value over $1 million in property in the 1880s. And when she died, her estate was worth over $2 million. So, and she willed most of it to various religious institutions, but that is a significant sum of money for a single woman at that point in time. She is buried in the Holy Cross Catholic Cemetery in Colma. Dutton Avenue. So George Washington Dutton is born in Tamales in 1874. Can you imagine how big Tamales was in 1874? Because it's not very big now. The father moved the family out from Ohio, and his older brother, that was quite an age span, 20 years older, went ended up purchasing a fruit orchard in the Roseland tract. And his older brother was actually responsible for establishing the reputation of Burbank Nurseries by placing an order for 20,000 fruit trees. And in 1881, when George was just 7 years old, his father moves the family to this ranch. And his father starts managing the orchards and becomes known as one of the best fruit growers in the county. So his father dies when George is 19, and he takes over the ranch and starts expanding the orchards and extending other operations. And that includes what used to be there was the Roseland fruit dryer operation. And fruit was a big deal back in the 1800s for Santa Rosa, and the railroads helped ship a lot of it around the state and to other states. So this Roseland fruit dryer was probably a very necessary and valued operation. George also was a partner in a fruit packing plant in Eureka. But it wasn't always smooth sailing, because as a farmer, you're going to be at the whim of the weather and other things that happen, like the phylloxera that the Turk had a problem with. So George, in his own words, went broke several times, but he managed to rebound each time. And at some point, he starts buying and selling land and becomes one of the best known realtors in the area. And he also served as a director of the Exchange Bank and was involved in a lot of the fraternal organizations. The Elks, the Native Sons, and the Eagles were all groups that were active at that point. And he continued to grow crops, including prunes and hops, which we don't hear about a lot, but was also very popular back then, until his death at the age of 71, and he is entombed in the Chapel of the Chimes. And here, by the way, is a picture of property out in the Dutton area. You can tell by the car how old that picture is. I wish I could have gotten it a little larger for everybody, but it wasn't fitting based on its linear design here, shape, but it's a pretty incredible picture. McMinn Avenue. So Joseph McMinn and his wife, Mary Dixon, were early pioneers in Southwest Santa Rosa. They had traveled from Missouri in 1852 by covered wagon. He was a veteran of the War of 1812, and he had a prior wife, his first wife, Charlotte, who he married in Tennessee in 1820. They had 4 children. And after Charlotte died, he marries Mary Dixon, who already had 4 children from a previous marriage, and together they have 5 more children. So they have 13 children, the last one born in 1844. They arrive in Sonoma County, and he buys 162 acres of land that was part of the Carrillo landholding, and they build a 15-room house, which I guess he would need with that many children, with a fireplace in the parlor, and each of the 7 bedrooms had a fireplace. So you can see the house here this is from one of the 1877, I believe, atlases, when, of course, you didn't have photography. So, well, you did have photography, but it wasn't very popular back then. And here is a sketch of his house, which unfortunately no longer exists. He plants wheat and raises cattle, and he also served as the clerk of the court for the city of Santa Rosa. His son, John, buys an adjoining 160 acres, and from his property, Luther Burbank buys 18 acres. So they must have known the Burbanks pretty well. The driveway to the McMinn property became a public road. It was named as Burbank Avenue, so this is a twofer. And so you've got Burbank Avenue and you've got McMinn Avenue. His son Joseph was a county road commissioner, so maybe that's how they got named after the family and their friend Luther Burbank. And also Sonoma County Supervisor, Sonoma County Sheriff, Mayor of Healdsburg, and served as a director of the Golden Gate Bridge District. So his son Joseph was very much involved in the community. Joseph and Mary and several family members are buried in the Santa Rosa Rural Cemetery. Now we have Trobridge Street. So George Trobridge was born in Wisconsin, and along with his parents came out to California in 1876. The family settled in Oakland, so they didn't come directly to Santa Rosa. They went to Oakland, and his father establishes the Oakland Iron Works. And George becomes a bookkeeper, not for his father's business, but for the Oakland Boiler Works in San Francisco. He meets his wife Emma there, and Emma is the daughter of E.B. Flint, who is a millionaire living in Oakland. So they're married, and over 24 years, they have 9 children, 5 girls and 4 boys. And you can see in this picture that you've got 7 of the children, if I'm counting it right. And that's a great picture. You don't usually get a picture like this from the 1800s. It's a wonderful picture showing the family, and maybe it's before the last 2 children were born. Eventually, George and Emma arrive in Sonoma County, and they settle in Windsor, and they live there for 2 decades. So they don't come straight, they're still not coming straight to Santa Rosa. But by 1900, the families moved to Lincoln Street, the 200 block of Lincoln Street, which is on the west side of the freeway. 4 years later, they purchased the former home of Overton, who was president of the Santa Rosa Savings Bank and also had the hotel. And that home was located on Washington Street. So now we've gone back to the east side of the freeway. And Mrs. Trobridge loved the house. Her last child was born there, and they had lots of parties there, and several marriages of her children were held there. George, in the meantime, becomes a real estate investor with properties in Sonoma County and even some as far away as Sacramento in the Bay Area. And while he was in Windsor, he was involved with a group of businessmen that were successful in getting the Southern Pacific Railroad to add a line to Santa Rosa. So that was pretty impressive. Around 1905, he brings the National Ice Company to Santa Rosa, and ice, of course, would have been very important in that day and age, and becomes its director. Sometime prior to that, he became a state senator, holding the position for at least 12 years. And while senator, he continues his property holdings and expanding them, and purchasing and operating farms now in Sacramento and in Sebastopol. So he had quite a bit going on. He raises crops and cattle, and he's also a member of the Royal Archmasons and the Knights of Templar organizations. But tragedy strikes in 1924 when Emma is killed in an automobile accident. And after her death, the home she loved so much was converted to apartments, and then eventually torn down to make way for the freeway. And George dies a year and a half later, and both George and Emma and at least 5 of their children are buried in the Shiloh Cemetery. And I am looking here. Yeah, we're good. Trobridge Street is not in the West End Preservation District. It is named, well, maybe it is. I'm going to have to go back and check on that. I don't think it is, but I could be wrong. Yes, actually it is. So this is in the wrong location. It's not Southwest Santa Rosa, but it's still a great story. So here we are. This should be the last one, and this one is about Wright Street. So Winfield Wright, another person born in Missouri. So that wagon train definitely contributed to a lot of our population back in the day, or that trail. He is engaged in stock trading. And when they say stock trading, they mean livestock at the age of 15 already in Missouri. And he marries Sarah Boone, the granddaughter of Daniel Boone. And they come out, here we go again. So he comes out during the gold rush. He operates some mule teams and for 2 years near the mines, and he returns to Missouri a wealthy man. And at the age of 31, he comes back to California crossing the plains with his parent and wife and 400 head of cattle, if you can imagine going through a number of states herding cattle. They settle in Sonoma County. He purchases 4,500 acres from Santa Rosa all the way to the coast, and he starts raising dairy cows, pigs, and wheat. He's heavily involved in the Democratic Party and serves 2 terms in the state assembly, even though he struggled with his health. And around that same time, he helps found the Pacific Methodist College, which was a very significant college that unfortunately is no longer here. It also was torn down eventually, but it is a very impressive looking college. And he's also involved in a group. So there's a lot of people trying to get the railroad extended around Santa Rosa. And this group he was involved with is trying to get the railroad going from Petaluma to Healdsburg. The SMART train, right? So by the 1880s census, he's noted as being blind, and then he starts having a couple of paralyzing strokes and dies in 1892. When he dies, he is one of the richest men, if not the richest man in the city, worth $10 million, and owns a house surrounded by a square mile of property in the McDonald Avenue area. And he, Wright Road, Wright District, and Wright School, and Wright's Beach are all named after Winfield Wright and his family. And here's our answer to our trivia question. What is the study of road names called? Odonomy. So now you have a new trivia you can share with people. And I've just listed the resources here, quite a few resources that went into this. And so that people could have an idea. If you want to research your street, here are some ideas of where you would go to do that. But hopefully we'll have at least a part 2 and be able to share some more street history with you. And if there are any streets you particularly want us to research, go ahead and put it into the chat and we'll take a look at that.
All right, Denise, this has been a very informative presentation, and I know you have quite a few other streets kind of in your back pocket to bring to us in another presentation, but we're gonna bring this to questions now. So I want to go over what's happening now for those of you who have been following along. We have had a presentation. We are live here on Zoom for our webinar, and we're also streaming live on Facebook as well. So if you have questions, go ahead and put those in the chat area. You'll be keying them in. Those that are on Facebook, you can key them in as comments, and our Facebook administrator will be bringing them to us in the chat area here on Zoom. We have had a few questions and comments during the presentation, and thank you everybody for being patient while the presentation happened before we got to those. Earlier, very early in the presentation, you had mentioned the renaming of some streets, and you had mentioned that Mission Street was once Reservoir Road, but we had one of our participants ask if that was actually Mission Boulevard.
It was, that was a typo. Yeah, she's absolutely right.
There you go. Yeah. So well, thanks for clearing that one up. And then, thanks for Brett. He was, wowed by some of the information that you were presenting, like the Athenaeum being a 2,000 seat facility, which that just seems, some of the numbers throughout the presentation have been really big, right? Kind of hard to fathom given the timeline that it happened at. But it was great to see all of this information. And as you had mentioned prior to this happening tonight, that you were able to bring all of this information and put it all in one place for everybody. And with that, I want to mention to those that are watching that this presentation is being recorded. So the Historical Society of Santa Rosa does have a YouTube page, and this presentation's recording will appear on their YouTube page. they also hook that up onto their website. And as you know, if you're on Facebook Live, that recording stays on Facebook as well. It's just a little bit easier to find if you go to YouTube or you go to the Historical Society's website.
And it looks like Brett knows quite a bit about Santa Rosa, and he's actually telling us that the Athenaeum seated 2,000, and it was a very impressive building for such a small town. And I see also that he's telling us that many Boyce descendants still are in Santa Rosa, which is good to know. That would be fun to get some more information from them.
Yeah, definitely. And Larry was also involved and posting some information during the presentation, one of which I'll skip ahead to is about the Boyce house, actually. And this one, that the Metzger descendants actually live there now, and that brother-in-law lives next door, so in those two similar houses that are right there. And you mentioned that they're on B Street next to Brew Coffee and Beer, so that that gives kind of a little context for people. Beautiful houses, right? Beautiful gardens.
Yeah.
And it's a great area to walk around if you haven't walked around that area lately. You've got the St. Rose Church, and you can walk through their beautiful gardens as well. And then lots of praise from folks like Karen about the great presentation, and asking if you have any more info on Monroe, and that the Monroe School was named after.
We will put that on our list.
Right? You have some more research to do, and you've already done so much research. I mean, this could have gone on for a really long time. I think Denise might get asked to put on a course or something at some point. But it brings me to say that the Historical Society of Santa Rosa, if you want to get more involved in this, is to resource the Historical Society of Santa Rosa, and be sure to check out their website. And I'll be switching over to another screen soon to where you'll see what that website address is. Larry also asked that would like to hear about Leonard and Sonoma Talbot and how they're related.
Okay, we did do an article on Talbot Street, and the other couple of streets are named after family members in a newsletter. I want to say earlier this year, our newsletters are up on our website. But we'll take a look at that and see if we've got some more information on that specific question.
Yeah, and yeah, that website is just chock full of information, so be sure to resource that, like I was mentioning before. And this is a great question coming now, is why these streets are switching names. You know, E Street turns into King Street, and Fourth, what turns into Farmers, not Farmers, Fourth continues on to, what is that?
It goes into Highway 12.
Yeah.
It's a pop quiz.
Yeah.
It crosses Farmers.
Why are the streets changed names so often in Santa Rosa?
You know, that's something I think eventually what happens is a street, well, something like E Street would have been named really early on, right, when they did the grid. And so then here comes along somebody who's named King, and you want to honor him with a street, his name, which we'll put King on our list for next time. And so so you take a part of E Street probably and turn it into King Street in order to do that. I'm theorizing here that that's what's going on. You kind of running out of streets at a certain point, or else streets that are near where that person either had their business, or much more likely their personal property that their house was on.
Definitely. And it could, maybe that could be a female, right? So it could be her last name instead of his, or and it's unfortunate. I was thinking about that too during some of these stories, that the Fulkerson name is in a street, but the Barham name is.
It is
So,
Fulkerson. There is a Fulkerson, and
oh,
it's on the our list. Yeah.
okay,
So we do have a Fulkerson.
great. And then was that actually named after her, or was that because of her dad?
Yeah, that is a good question.
Okay, all right, yeah. The questions
More
are going to
research to
abound,
come.
right? The questions and the comments and the stories, and that's a great thing too, is that these presentations are going to bring about stories. They're going to bring about some of those testimonials and some of that historical information that families have, right? And maybe they're unfound information so far. So
Yeah.
please
And
do share that information as
I love
well.
these questions because it's giving us an idea of what to focus on next time. I'm pretty sure the question about whether Ripley Street is named after Robert Ripley, I imagine it most probably is, because he was, a big force here after he became successful. He mostly moved on and lived in around the New York area, I believe. But when he grew up here, of course, he was going to Lewis School, and it was like small town boy makes good. So I imagine that is most likely what that street is named after, is Robert Ripley. But we'll put it on the list.
Yeah,
And
and before that, we had someone ask a question around who Davis Street is named after. Again, if we don't know that answer right now, we'll look that one up, right? And then is there a famous Rincon for Middle Rincon Road? Was there an Upper and Lower
I
Rincon as
feel like
well?
Rincon is a possibly a Hispanic word. That's my gut, is it has to do with something that's going to be like the mountain or the valley or something like that, would be my guess. But we'll definitely take a look at it and confirm that. The just this, and this was pretty amazing to me, because I honestly didn't know these stories were going to be out there. And we just grabbed a bunch of streets and started moving forward with the stories. And some of them, there was a little bit of information already on in Gayla Barron's columns and such. But really, this kind of stuff, the kind of stories we came up with, it was just amazing. So I apologize that I don't have answers for the other people, because my entire life for the last month has been getting these 19 street names figured out and what the history is. But I love that you're asking these, because then we can just move on to these streets. We know what our part two has to include because of the questions.
Yeah, and also there's that communal knowledge, right? So William Harris brought forth that Rincon in Spanish is a small valley, but then Ray Johnson says Rincon in Spanish is for corner or pocket. And as we all know, sometimes a word in Spanish can mean several different things, depending on what origin of the area south of the border, and actually much of California back in that day, the word originated, or you were using that word in. So again, lots of praise for this great informative presentation. Larry also is following back up on the Boyce house, Dr. Boyce's house that was moved over to there to B Street. And he thinks that Michelle Zimrowski is the Mitzker descendant, and that she's an attorney and married to Kevin
Konachek.
Konacek.
Konachek,
Yeah,
and he
so
actually Kevin is the Metzger descendant.
and here's a good question too. And can we send the presentation to those that are registered for the presentation? And actually, no. Unfortunately, this is a large file, right? So this is why we post it on YouTube, and you can watch it there. And you can also, the Historical Society of Santa Rosa makes sure that that video is also available on their website. So they take that YouTube video, and then they post it onto their website. And of course, you can also find it on Facebook, because that Facebook live stream becomes a recording on the Historical Society of Santa Rosa's Facebook page. And this again brings me to point out the Historical Society's website, which is historicalsocietysantarosa.com. And this is a great resource for membership. I want to encourage everybody, if you're not already, to become a member of the Historical Society. You can find gifts like videos, CDs, all of the newsletters are there, and the links to their social media pages like Facebook, YouTube, and more. So please do access their website. It is a great resource, and who knows, you might walk away learning a little bit more about Santa Rosa. So there is so much more information. We've gone over quite a bit, but I want to ask you, Denise, I know that you've kind of forecasted ahead that there might be a second presentation of this, but if there were one thing that you could do just a little bit, what enticed you in this presentation? What was like the one thing you're like, oh, I wish I could find more information about this character, this gentleman or this female that you told us a little bit about tonight?
I think the two that come to mind right away are Corby, because she must have had an interesting life, but of course, back then the people didn't write about the women or acknowledge the women as much in the newspaper articles you can get access to. So she's still a question mark of who she was and what her interest was in investing in Sonoma County and how she was connected to residents here. And then Caesar Maida, who had the winery, was another one that there was very little information to actually verify anything beyond the very limited detail that I provided. It wasn't as robust, results on the research as we would like.
Yeah, those are great. Those are definitely ones that brought up some curiosities, that's for sure. And another question that comes to mind is that how are streets named? So now we see kind of in history that it was mostly prominent folks, right? Except maybe for Hermit Way. But that was definitely a individual that was prominent in everybody's hearts, right? So today, how do we know how the city or the county decides on street naming? Is there an actual process to that? Because we are growing, we're expanding, there's new streets that are being created in some of these subdivisions or areas around town. So is that something that maybe we can bring that information to the next presentation as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be interesting to
Definitely.
to know what the process is now and how easy it is to name a street. If it's just the developers that get to name them, and then they just have carte blanche, or if there's actually some guidelines. I'm being told by my faithful.
Well, yeah, and Cher Ennis actually. So Cher is a great resource of information, and Cher has served with the county, has worked for the county, and actually served on boards and commissions and whatnot. And she says, I can tell you a ton about how streets are named now. So we're going to need that information,
great.
Cher. And she will, we'll definitely be talking to her and getting some more information about how that happens. And maybe that can be a presentation in and of itself. History, we look back often on history, right? We talk about history in this way of looking back and seeing what's happened in the past. But the reality is history is being made today. And with some of the policies that we have that are being enacted and written, and some of the processes that we have. So it's a good thing to remember, to look at what is happening today and think about what the history will be come 50 to 100 years from now.
Absolutely. I just want to make one small correction on the website. It's actually ins.org. So if you type that in, go ahead and change com to org in order to get to our website.
Actually, if you put com, it'll still go.
Oh,
So it'll
yay.
go to the Historical
Okay.
Society, Santa Rosa. It'll just
Someone's-
change it to org. So you'll be
Technology
fine.
is looking out for us.
It does. It completely does. So great research, spectacular presentation. And what is coming up next for the Historical Society of Santa Rosa? Denise, since you're on the board, is this a little break for the winter? And
yeah, there's going to be a little break, but I imagine that January, February will come back with another webinar. And we are going to have a membership meeting this year, which we weren't able to have during COVID, an in-person meeting. So we're looking forward to doing that. Yeah, there's several ideas being worked on for military and how the military history evolved in our area, and these people that are working on it know a lot about it on our board. So I'm hoping that we get to see one of those come up in January or February as a webinar, as long as we can get, the right information and maybe get a speaker in to come in and step in and talk to us about the different, we have different airstrips and things like that kind of disappeared as in the narrative of Santa Rosa, but were very important, of course, during the early wars.
yeah. And just want to point out too that I definitely do see the information about a recently named street in Vallejo, and trying to scroll up to that just a little bit more right now, that the rapper E40 had his name put onto a street, and that was pretty powerful. It's the anniversary of rap here in the United States, and street names, although the convention in Vallejo may be different than in Santa Rosa or Sonoma County, having representation of a rapper, which those of you that know, here's a little history too, that rap is a big thing all over the Bay Area, right? So it's not surprising that we're going to have rappers' names as street names. And actually pretty darn cool. That's a pretty cool thing about history right there happening today. And here's a little information about Rohnert Park that does mostly alphabetical neighborhoods. Yes. And that's a whole nother history about Rohnert Park and the planned community that Rohnert Park has been, right? And how they have their different the A neighborhood and B and C and D and whatnot. So
yes, I think one of our newest cities, if not our newest.
Yeah, maybe at some point the Sonoma County Historical Society will do a presentation about that and include different cities like Rohnert Park in that presentation. So I want to thank all of our participants for coming out tonight and for all of your great sharing of information and asking of really wonderful questions to our presenter tonight. Of course, thank you to Denise Hill. For those of you, you can only imagine that this presentation and this hour and a half that we spent with all of you tonight was preceded by many, many, many hours of research and getting this information gathered with the pictures, and just having this in this format. So thank you, Denise, for all of your hard work and your passion around all of this and really making the information come alive tonight with your stories.
Absolutely. Happy to do it.
Yeah. And I want to take a moment again to remind you that this recording will be on YouTube, and you can find that information out at the Historical Society of Santa Rosa's website, as well as you can find a great many other things and buy a membership for yourself or one for a friend or a neighbor as a holiday gift. And speaking of holidays, Thanksgiving is right around the corner. So everybody have a wonderful holiday and a wonderful Thanksgiving. We are so grateful to all of you for participating in these presentations. So for now, this is Leslie Graves.
Great.
We're going to sign off. We're all done. And thank you again, everybody. Stay safe out there.